Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on today's session. And what I wanted to talk to you about today is neurodiversity in the workplace. It's a hugely important issue that I don't believe gets enough attention, and something that we should all educate ourselves a little bit further and a little bit better on. It's lovely to see so many new names on the webinar today as well. So if you could, just in the question box, pop a little note just to say where you're tuning in from and what industry you work within. That will really help me later in the session to draw on some examples. So if you could just pop that in the question box, and then throughout today's session, if you have any HR, employment law, or health and safety questions relating to neurodiversity or beyond, please do let me know by putting those questions in the question box. So the information contained in today's session, just as a little disclaimer beforehand, is based on legislation from Great Britain and Northern Ireland. If you are tuning in from any of our other jurisdictions, anywhere else that we cover, please do seek advice relevant to the area you operate within. That being said, a lot of the information I'm going to go over today is pretty much just best practice irrespective of location. So do stick around. Hopefully there'll be something of use and value to each and every one of you on today's session. So in that question box there, we have Stephanie from Jersey, hospitality and tourism. That's absolutely fantastic. Welcome, Stephanie. And we've got Kitty, who currently is in Bristol, but lives in London and Brighton. And Kitty has a digital marketing agency. Very exciting. Thank you very much for joining us, Kitty. And 3 lovely areas you go between there, Bristol, London and Brighton. Absolutely love Brighton. Cracking place. Keep it coming with where you're tuning in from and what industry you operate within. It'll help me later on, and also it'll ensure that you have access to that question box and can ask questions throughout today's session. So who am I? Well, my name is Sam. I've been at Bright HR for 3 years now, starting out obviously prior to what has been the craziest experience I think any of us have had in our working lives to date, which was of course the global pandemic. What that has done is given me a real appreciation and inside perspective into businesses' operations throughout the pandemic, and what really has allowed them to grow and flourish throughout this really difficult and trying time. And one trend that I've seen, it really emerge as a result of being in a global pandemic for many people was the revaluing and taking stock of their life, not only in the workplace but also outside the workplace, and taking a more holistic approach to how they operate and how they manage their existences. And for a lot of people, that means giving more attention to their mental health and well-being, being more appreciative of neurodiverse individuals, really utilizing the skills that people have. And also it's led to, of course, the great resignation that we've seen in absolutely droves, where people are leaving their roles over and over again over certain issues that, whilst it might not align with their goals long term and their aspirations, there are certain traits and things that we can do as businesses to try and mitigate that happening as much as possible. So I'll talk about that in today's session as well. So we've got Stephanie here from Jersey, and we've got Claire from Matlock. I am from very close to Matlock, actually. So welcome. What are we going to cover in today's session? Well, first and foremost, what is neurodiversity? In order to tackle the beast, we need to understand the beast. And what I want to do is give you a comprehensive overview of what neurodiversity really is, what it means to be neurodiverse, and why the stigma attached to a diagnosis which falls under the neurodiversity spectrum is absolutely out of date and really unhelpful and not necessary in the world we live in today. Then I want to talk to you about embracing neurodiversity in the workplace as well, what a company can do proactively to ensure that that happens, what the company is required to do, so what legal obligations you have to individuals that fall under the neurodiverse spectrum, the right to disconnect, which is a really important thing that may or may not come into legislative practice, but is something worth mentioning over and over again, and something worth implementing as a company as well if you don't already. And then finally, heading up with timekeeping, which again is a really important facet to working life, and also something that people are finding very challenging, particularly working from alternative locations. So first and foremost, what is neurodiversity? Well, neurodiversity, of course, is an umbrella term that accounts for many different diagnoses, spectrum disorders, and can fall on many levels. There is no one size fits all for what neurodiversity is, and it accounts for around about 15 to 20% of the global population, which is an absolutely huge amount. Now, disorders that you immediately think of would be things like autism, Asperger's, things of that nature. But we also think we need to, incorporate different disorders such as OCD, such as dyslexia, would fall under the neurodiversity umbrella. And whilst in the workplace traditionally, it may have been to somebody's advantage to keep that, kind of close to their chest and not reveal that they were neurodiverse in that way. It's becoming more and more accepted. And one thing that we see time and time again is that companies who embrace a neurodiverse culture, environment, and team absolutely thrive, because everybody, every single person has benefits that they can bring to the table. And whilst what some people might see as a drawback in some areas, it could, give the individual the ability to absolutely excel and exceed in other areas as well. Now, there are many, many misconceptions surrounding neurodiversity, those being that those individuals might not be able to work, that they might not be as reliable or as productive as a neurotypical member of staff. And of course, these are really, really untrue. Something that we recognise with autistic adults is that over the age group 16 to 64 in the UK, around about 78% of them are unemployed, which is an absolutely shocking statistic. It's the highest unemployment rate of any group. So 48% of all disabled people are unemployed in the UK. 19% of all adults are unemployed in the UK. And 78% of individuals diagnosed with autism in the UK are unemployed. It's an absolutely shocking figure. It's really, really detrimental. Having a diagnosis of autism does not inhibit your ability to succeed in life, and nor should it be off-putting for an employer to see an individual enter the interview process with an autism diagnosis. And that goes for so many diagnoses. I don't want to diminish this down to one, diagnosis and pin the term of neurodiversity on it, because it applies across the board. Of course, that's not to downplay the really severe limitations that can come about as having a neurodiverse diagnosis. There are many individuals who are unable to carry out work in life, and they would be unable to live in their own home, for example, without care and round-the-clock support. So it really does depend upon the individual, but a diagnosis is not, a life sentence. It's not something that has to define what a person can aim for and what they can achieve as well. So the origins of the term neurodiversity came about in around about 1998 by sociologist Judy Singer, and it conveys the idea that the neurological differences shaping how people think and interact are natural variations of the human genome. Neurodiversity, therefore, isn't something to be fixed. It's not something to be cured. It's not something that we should look to assimilate those individuals into what we would consider a neurotypical way of existence, but it's something that we simply live with and accept for what it is and try and place those individuals as best as possible. So there are many, many benefits to hiring individuals that are fall within the neurodiverse spectrum. We have an ageing population, of course. 1 in 3 workers are over 50, according to the International Longevity Centre, and the average age of acquired disability is 53. So we know that our workforce already will be facing a changing cognitive dynamic. And then we've got long-term COVID effects as well, which affect our executive function. We've got menopause as we get older. So we do have an array of different illnesses that may arise, and many different disorders that may show more prevalence as we age. So it isn't going to be something that we can, hold off on doing. We will have to embrace neurodiversity. We will have to embrace a changing workforce. By the end of the year, it's estimated that 1 in 6 women within the workforce will be over the age of 50. And therefore, having a menopause policy is going to be absolutely vital to the success and continuation of your business, because it will be so much of your workforce. And neurodiversity is no different. Top benefits. So, we have these really, really negative, we have negative connotations of these sorts of diagnoses. So we would think, potentially that people with the diagnosis of ADHD wouldn't be able to concentrate. But the flip side of ADHD, of course, is hyperfocus, and we see that in really prevalent figures amongst people that are diagnosed with ADHD, giving them an absolute laser-locked radar vision on getting a job done, completing a task, and doing it to the best of their ability. And that's something that I think, neurotypical people might not be able to do in such a great capacity, or with such gusto, or with such, dedication. So it really is about finding the right person for the right role. Again, a lot of people think that autistic people don't enjoy social interaction, when that can be completely false. An autistic person could absolutely thrive off social interaction. And maybe if it's a one-on-one setting that they feel uncomfortable with, are they good at public speaking? It's the same questions that you would ask absolutely anybody else. Neuro differences are as unique as our fingerprints, and there is no one size fits all that we can attribute to one individual. So I would recommend always, as a business, not taking any diagnosis at face value and attributing our own assumptions to it. What we would need to do is carry on an interview process as normal and meet with that individual. What are their skills? What are they good at? The same as you would carry out an interview with absolutely anybody else. So when it comes to embracing neurodiversity, this is something that actually Microsoft has carried out a lot of work on, in how embracing neurodiversity can change the landscape of the business culture, the business performance, and also the business developments as well. One thing that they noticed was that autistic candidates who were responsible for writing codes and developing services seemed to churn out these codes and services at a much faster rate than neurotypical counterparts. They also helped other employees by providing training on managing a neurodiverse workforce, and the company as a whole, so Microsoft, through the study that they carried out on the neurodiverse sector that they were working on, they fostered a more inclusive environment, they found, because people who hadn't stepped forward and revealed their diagnosis prior to the study then began to do so because they felt like it was an environment in which they were safe. So what they actually realized then is they've got self-identifying individuals who they had absolutely no idea fell under the neurodiverse umbrella. So it is probably a case that you already have neurodiverse individuals working for and amongst you, potentially without even realizing it. So what we want to do ideally as a business is implement a successful and scalable program to ensure that we are really embracing neurodiversity as a concept and as a whole, and embracing individuals as well. There's nothing better than having a room full of people who are all from different backgrounds, who have all had different experiences and all think in different ways. Nothing will quite create that creative environment and that real natural ability to bounce off one another than that. The worst thing that you could do for creativity was have a room full of people who all thought and felt and exist in exactly the same way, because you're not then going to have any opposition, you're not going to have counterpoints. You might end up with something that is a lot less diverse and a lot less relevant to the world you're trying to exist within. So what we're seeing when companies are embracing neurodiversity is that their talent pool widens. Maybe if they had this kind of stigmatic approach to people with neurodiversities, they weren't hiring necessarily the best candidates for the role, because they would automatically kind of dismiss somebody on the basis of a diagnosis. So what you actually see with companies that do that 180 and start embracing neurodiversity is that their talent pool widens, their skill sets widen, their innovations increase, because people have different ways of thinking and different ways of problem resolution. We also see loads and loads of creativity flourishing in those environments, because, as I said there, people from different walks of life will have different perceptions and different perspectives on what is successful and what works, and therefore you have this massive collaboration that enables your approach to be really, really successful. And then, of course, as with the Microsoft study there, we have enhanced management skills, in that our managers are then broader in how they can deal with individuals, and they have a greater skill set as a result of having to manage various people as well. So all in all, it's a real positive for the company, and something that I would recommend absolutely everybody that I speak to, and I do recommend it to all the businesses I speak to. In the midst, as I say, of the great resignation there, we've got thousands upon thousands of vacancies and everybody's job adverts look exactly the same. We need to ensure that we are standing out from the crowd, we are cultivating the right environment, and we are trying our best to be as inclusive and accommodating to people as possible. The easiest way to get over a recruitment crisis is retain the members of staff that you've got, of course. So if somebody's asking for a reasonable adjustment, if there is something you can do for somebody, I absolutely would recommend that you do it. But what can you do? What can you proactively do to encourage neurodiverse individuals within your workplace, and to make them feel safe and supported? Now, I would like to preface this slide by saying that, first and foremost, it is an absolute minefield at the minute with people coming back to work. People have been, potentially for 2.5 years now, sitting in a home office with zero stimuli, zero distractions potentially, and now they're in an office environment surrounded by people. We've seen a huge rise in the number of mental health cases that are diagnostically presented to people. We're also seeing a huge rise in the number of sick notes and fit notes that are being handed out by doctors. I've said it time and time again, we've come out a global pandemic and we've ended up in a mental health epidemic. People are really, really struggling at the moment. Levels of stress, levels of anxiety are absolutely through the roof. So first and foremost, one thing that I would implore that every company does is just ask their members of staff how they're doing, ask if they're okay, have those open lines of communication with them. If people are struggling with the noise, with the distractions that they're getting, there are simple things that you could potentially do to help encourage people to feel a lot more safe and secure. A lot of people with neurodiversity or traits of neurodiversity will have things like sensory overload, whereby if there is too much stimulation all going off at once, it can be really, really alarming. It can be really, really debilitating as well, and it'll prevent that level of focus that they're used to having in a home environment potentially. So we see lots and lots of companies now adopting headphones. So not necessarily headphones that are playing music, but those headphones that kind of sit within your ear and drop the volume by 20 decibels or something like that. And that can be really, really useful in allowing that person to feel a lot more calm, a lot more centered, a lot more relaxed, and crack on with their work. That goes along with having things like signs or having things like quiet times during the day where you've allocated specific times for people to be a little quieter. One thing that does really help as well is having a break room that's allocated specifically to quietness, because there'd be nothing worse than being an individual that's maybe can't have those headphones in because they have a telephone job, and then they just want a little bit of peace and quiet on their lunch break, and everyone's shouting and screaming in the canteen, in the break room, wherever it might be. So trying to provide that safe space for individuals if headphones aren't going to be something that you can accommodate, or if having those quiet times aren't really something that you could kind of introduce, we could certainly have a quiet space. So there are all these ideas that you can bring into your working practice and your working life. You can create policies surrounding these, and it's really, really easy to integrate and introduce something like that. Also, a lot of people are very twitchy. You've probably noticed, we've been listening to me for 16 minutes. Cannot sit still, absolutely cannot sit still. I gesticulate wildly as I'm speaking, and I'm a fidgeter. I'm a real big fidgeter, and very often it comes in the very, very irritating form of pen clicking, and I know it absolutely riles everybody around me, but I find it really hard to sit still. So one thing that you could do is provide fidget toys. They had their moment a few years ago. They were really big. They're now very, very cheap, and also you can get the silent type. So what that will do is engage people's fingers. It will engage that need to move for those individuals without disturbing or distracting anyone else. And that's a recommendation that I would give to absolutely anybody. As somebody that finds it really difficult, the less annoying I can be for other people, the the more I feel comfortable with that. So that's something that I utilize quite frequently, is having something that just to touch, to move, to whatever, can keep that requisite for constant movement at bay. And then one thing that I wanted to mention about feedback as well, providing feedback for neurodiverse people might be a little more tricky to navigate, but in terms of providing feedback to all your members of staff, it is best practice to follow the guide that I'm going to give you now, which is always use simple language. We don't want superfluous words in there. We don't want to overcomplicate things. We want the message to be direct, clear, and simple. We don't want to use things like euphemisms. We don't want to allow people to read between the lines to glean the answers. We want to be as direct as possible. We're not just talking about neurodiversity in terms of illnesses like diagnoses like autism, like OCD, things of that nature, dyslexia. We could also be referring to things like major depressive disorders, severe bouts of anxiety disorder. And what that will do is not necessarily be a diagnosis long term, but it could really affect someone's thinking during that period of time that they are going through that. And so providing feedback which is ambiguous, or making sarcastic comments, providing euphemisms, it might be really, really detrimental to that individual. And that stands for anybody that's either neurotypical or neurodiverse as well. We want to catch everybody with that, because it's not a good way to provide feedback, and it's not a sustainable way to keep and maintain happy members of staff. So we want to ensure that our feedback is effective, preferably data driven, if we can provide examples as well, and also particularly if we want to give someone positive feedback, make sure we're doing that as well. And that's something that all businesses can do and incorporate, is providing positive feedback where it's due, because I think that very often that, is something that's missed. And we do have, companies all over the world now that are introducing those, neurodiversity programs. So Microsoft, as I mentioned earlier, we've also got JP Morgan, SAP, that have introduced things like peer mentors, job coaches, and work buddies to develop rich feedback channels, particularly for their neurodiverse employees. So if we have peer mentors, if we have somebody that's been in the role for a period of time, can they take a new member of staff under their wing, and can they, really nurture that one individual? Because this is something that we've been putting in place for the long term. As I mentioned earlier, we are going through a period of great resignation, and at the moment, retention is just as important as recruiting. Because if you've got your recruitment down and you're really, really good with recruitment, but you have a leaky bucket at the bottom, you're going to be stuck in that recruitment cycle for the foreseeable future. We want to ensure that the employees we have feel valued and feel appreciated. We want to ensure that those coming into the company can see that positive culture and will be able to assimilate with that positive culture, and hopefully that positivity will radiate and grow. So what are you required to do as a company? What is it a legal requirement for you to do? Well, first and foremost, you do, of course, have to abide by the Equality Act 2010. This means that, there is no need for a diagnosis, and it's the effect, not the cause, that you are treating. As business owners, we are not physicians. We are not diagnostic medical practitioners. We would not be able to prescribe to that individual what medications or actions they should or should not take as a result of a potential diagnosis. We are not able to do that. But what we can do is make reasonable adjustments to the individual based on what they're reporting to you. So we don't have to have a diagnosis in order to make these reasonable adjustments. It's our duty of care to that individual to provide reasonable adjustments if necessary, and try and make things as easy as that individual as possible. So a legal firm recently carried out some research, and it claims that claims about neurodiversity are up by a third in tribunal cases. Now, tribunal cases are on the rise across the board. This isn't something that's unique to neurodiversity. We are seeing it across the board. One of the biggest reasons for tribunal at the moment is absences, and particularly in the wake of the force majeure over the pandemic. We've got people that have got carryover that were then denied carryover, things of that nature. So tribunals are on the up and up across the board. But one thing to note as a business owner is that it's perfectly, free for an employee to take you to tribunal. It's not free for you, of course. It would be on average around about £8,500 without paying any settlements that are agreed if you are found to be the guilty party in that instance. So one thing that we want to aim to do as much as possible is mitigate that tribunal risk. We want to toe as much of the line as we can and provide as much as we can for our members of staff, because £8,500 for a small business, that could be doors closed. It's not an eventuality that we want to see for people that we speak to. So we should be making those reasonable adjustments, and we should be ensuring that people are catered for, people are cared for, and most at the base of it all, people are listened to and people are heard. If an employee comes to you with an issue, comes to you with a problem, comes to you with a concern, that first and foremost you are there to hear them. And one thing that isn't, a requirement as such, it's not a legal requirement for you to have, but one thing that lends itself really well to employee well-being, is something that I think is a really, really important thing that you could be doing, is appointing people mental health first aiders. Now, it may seem a little bit excessive, particularly if you're a small business, but we've treated physical health that way for years and years and years. Chances are every single person I'm speaking to today has a physical health first aider, somebody that will provide CPR if necessary, somebody that will, give those emergency medical treatments to that individual. I'm one of the first aiders here at Bright HR, and I have been for a long, long, long time. And we've just started introducing mental health first aiders as well, and I think that's an absolutely brilliant addition. What it could do for you is, provide that support if you are not comfortable with those sorts of issues. And I know a lot of people aren't. A lot of people don't like talking about mental health, find it difficult to emphasize with those people that are maybe on a different spectrum to themselves. We want to ensure that there is somebody in place who can, and having that mental first aider can be that individual, could be that individual for you. So it would take place exactly the same as a physical health first aider. That individual would go off to the training, get the certificate, mental health first aider. And it does sound exaggerative, but that could be the difference between life and death for somebody who works for you. And is it worth taking that risk? I think for a few quid to get them trained up, and what it does for you as a business owner as well is shows your compassion to individuals. So it's going to be a real positive from all ends of the spectrum, really. So employee well-being, which is, something that I've just touched on there, but employee well-being is something that is really quite genuinely at a fragile point. We've got 38% of the world's employees reporting that they felt symptoms of burnout over the last 12 months, which is an absolutely staggering amount. It's a huge number of the workforce. Imagine if 38% of the workforce just went off with stress. All at once, the world would collapse, the economy would collapse, we would have no doctors in hospitals, we'd have nobody to look after relatives. It would then snowball into everybody being stressed because there's nobody to do anything. So what we want to do as a business is obviously mitigate that as much as possible. You're sitting there and we've got Kitty with the digital marketing agency. Say you've got 4 members of staff and one of them goes off with stress, that's a quarter of your workforce down. So the other 3 are going to have to pick up the workload of that one individual, which means their workloads are increased. All of a sudden you can see how this ripple effect takes out your entire workforce really, really quickly. So what we want to do is support employee wellbeing as much as possible. And one thing that we did notice that I do think is worth mentioning to you at this point is that there is a huge discrepancy between what employers think they are doing for mental health and wellbeing and what employees report they are receiving. So the business owner perception of the study that showed that 38% of employees said that they'd suffered from burnout or symptoms of burnout over the last 12 months. So business owner perception was that 96% of business owners said, yeah, absolutely, we do enough for mental health, absolutely fine. That contrasts with 69% of employees reporting that their employer did enough for them. So we've got a 27% gap in the perceptions between employers and employees. So until we kind of get that closer together, until we drop the amount of discrepancy we have there, that 38% isn't going to change. That 38% is going to remain where it is because we have this culture whereby those at the top think that they're doing enough and those at the bottom are really quite suffering and struggling. So we want to bring that as close together as possible. We want to ensure that we are doing as much for our members of staff as we possibly can. Another thing that we noticed at the end of 2021, there was a Google analytics on word searches, which words have been searched for in the most prevalence over the past year. Now, over 2021, toxic habits, toxic traits, the searches for things like that were absolutely staggeringly increased. Multitasking as a phrase in Google saw a 50% increase. There was a 53% increase in chronic procrastination. Workplace stress saw a 30% increase. So by analysing Google Trends and what people are searching for over the course of that year gives a good indication of where we were over the last couple of years. And it's hardly surprising. It's hardly surprising. As business owners, we're also facing something that we've never ever faced before. So it's challenging for absolutely everybody all along the chain. So what we want to do is ensure that we are providing what we can for our members of staff. And one recent study has shown that access to mindfulness and meditation apps, particularly if somebody is looking for a job, if that job role is offering additional services when it comes to mental health and well-being, they are far more likely to be clicked on because people are looking for that holistic job package that's going to align with their hopes, aspirations, goals and outside life as well. So Bright HR does have a way to facilitate this. We have an EAP service. It's a very minimal cost. It's a confidential advice line, and what this will do is provide counselling sessions not only for your members of staff but also for their immediate family, and I think that's an absolutely fantastic service. I think it's the best thing that we do. We do have amazing software, we do have amazing features, we have so many great things, but the mental well-being, the mental health and the support for individuals, I think is the best thing that we do. Now, we will get in touch with you after today's session to see if there is anything that we can do for you, but this is something that I would highly recommend you taking a look into if you don't have a service like that already. So the right to disconnect then. What is the right to disconnect? Well, the right to disconnect is the theory that we have become so hideously contactable that we need some legality in place to stop that line of being contactable. We're more remote than ever. Everybody's got a mobile phone. Everybody has 24-hour access to the internet. We are so contactable. We could reach someone in Australia now, done. It's never been easier to get hold of somebody, and with that comes so many drawbacks. It might seem like a great thing, but of course there are so many drawbacks with that. And it also becomes it almost becomes an expectation that if you are reachable, you are ready to work and you're available to work. And that's not quite how it works if you're on, a salaried amount of money for a contracted amount of time per week. We have a working time directive for a reason. We don't want people to be working over 48 hours a week over a 17-week average period. We don't want to do that. We're not only contravening the working time directive, but we're also doing them a disservice by having that expectation on them. So the right to disconnect is not yet legislative practice in the UK. It is enforced in a multitude of other countries, and we're not sure really whether it will come into practice in the UK. But if it doesn't, I would still advise, absolutely wholeheartedly advise, that you do have some sort of policy pertaining to the right to disconnect, and you do kind of mention that to your members of staff moving forward. And it really does filter from the top down. What I recommend to business owners, and I've seen it in practice, and I think it's an absolutely brilliant thing to do, is just having your own email signature, available between this time and this time, this time and this time, or my office hours are, and just outline what times you'll be working and available. And I think that kind of trickles down to your members of staff as well. We have Brightbase that will help you create all those policies and documents. It's got fully editable documents on there. And we also have our advice line who will be able to help you fill out all that information. So you'll never have to write a document again. And all the policies and procedures you can think of are on there. Now, timekeeping obviously fills in really, really nicely with the right to disconnect, because in the same vein as we are so contactable, we saw over the pandemic a huge rise in the number of hours that people were carrying out, irrespective of how many hours they were contracted to carry out. Over the last year, people on average worked 6 hours more than their contracted hours, which is 6 hours for free per week, which on the face of it seems brilliant. As a business owner, you're getting 6 hours per person for free per week. Long-term detriments, of course, are those higher diagnoses of stress, those higher diagnoses of burnout. As I mentioned there, we've got a working time directive for a reason. We also have, statutory minimum annual leave entitlement for a reason. We have those 20 days of annual leave entitlement plus the 8 days of bank holiday. We have those for a reason. People need to disconnect. We are not machines. We are human beings who are made of imperfect, fleshy vessels, and we need that time, we need to breathe, we need that space. And very often, one thing that we see is that people who actually take that time come back with fresher and potentially better ideas than those people who never switch off. And one reason I want to talk about timekeeping in terms of neurodiversity and mental health and well-being is that, at the beginning of the pandemic, before the pandemic, we would have employers ringing us all the time about timekeeping and saying, so-and-so is perpetually late. They come in 10 minutes late every single day, and that costs us an hour a week every week. And I know that's terrible. We still don't want people to do that. But one thing that was more concerning during the pandemic for business owners was that their employees were putting in so many extra hours. They were then seeing a decline in that employee's performance overall. They weren't necessarily hitting the KPIs that they were hitting previously, and it's a result of those lines being so blurred between home life and personal life. And it is very, very easy to sit there and think, well, I'll just finish this off, I'll just do this, I'll just do this, and before you know it, you've nearly worked an whole extra day. So we need to ensure that healthy working life balance is given and granted to those individuals, particularly for neurodiverse individuals. It might be quite difficult to change and alter that mindset, and that goes for neurotypical people as well. If you are used to your entire working life finishing your day, sitting back from your desk, walking out the door, having the drive home, and then getting into your house, and that is your home time, to all of a sudden you're working and eating and then spending the evening on your kitchen table, it's a really, really difficult thing to kind of navigate in your own mind and reconcile as well. So it doesn't just stand for neurotypical people, it stands for everybody, and that timekeeping is a really, really important thing to think about. And of course, we have a service that will help you with this. Now, Blip is a geolocation tool. Blip will allow you to clock in and clock out wherever you are. Now, I've got to be honest, Blip really helped me. Our managers put Blip, our home addresses into Blip. It was hidden from absolutely everybody else. So nobody, walking past my house even would have been able to see where I live. But that gave me that start and finish time. That gave me that definitive beginning and end time to my day that really allowed me to kind of have that, period away to rest, recharge, recuperate, come back feeling fresh as a daisy the next day. Maybe not always a daisy, but more often than not a daisy. What also it will be able to do is if you have people in one location, if you have an office location where most people are working, or indeed if you work on site, we've got hospitality and tourism there, Stephanie. If you've got your people who are in hospitality and tourism, you've got them maybe out and about, you've got a real-time update there in the palm of your hand as to who's in and who's out of which location, should there be an accident or emergency. So in terms of health and safety, it's absolutely brilliant as well, because it will give you that real-time update. It doesn't track, it doesn't follow people. You wouldn't be able to see what they were doing on a Saturday night unless they were scheduled to work on that Saturday night. It wouldn't give you details of their private existence. All it can do is register that they've clocked in or out of that location, but it does give you peace of mind, and it will allow you to, have a better charge and control over people if there was an accident or emergency. So I also wanted to tell you about Bright HR Lightning. Now, this is a completely free service. At the end of this session, please feel free to go to lightning.brighthr.com. You can log in now for free. It's answers to over 7,000 HR queries, and it will register and recognise the questions that you've asked previously, and store those answers for you. This is the culmination of 30 years knowledge and expertise in HR and employment law. Please, please, please do check it out. It's completely free. You can use it as many times as you want, and it's obviously 24 hours because it is a website, and therefore you can access it all hours of the day. And when it comes to your advertisements, your job ads, and utilising your service, increasing the people that use your service, whatever your products and services may be, we have a really great feature that we've just released called Bright Exchange. And what Bright Exchange will do is allow you to advertise your products and services to other Bright HR users. So there's around about 450,000 users that access Bright Exchange. They would be able to see your advertisement, your offer, your discount, and therefore hopefully increase your profits. We also have 40,000 businesses that have access to Bright Exchange. So they are also offering their products and services very often at a discounted rate. So you and your employees will have access to use and utilize these great offers and discounts. So do check that one out as well. If you are looking for support, please don't hesitate to give me a call. I would love to speak to you. My number is 0161 513 1886. And at the end of this session, it will close down and you'll be presented with a survey. If you could fill out that survey, I would be eternally grateful. Any feedback that you have for us, either drop us an email or give us a call or drop us an email. We would absolutely love to hear from you, and it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. I hope that has been useful and that you've learned something, and please do let us know what you thought of today's session. Thank you, take care, and enjoy the rest of your day.